Welcome to History 394, Special Topics, History of India. This is Week 1. A little disclaimer here. Online classes, because of their very nature, are demanding. They require a great deal of self-discipline and self-motivation. So if you feel like you are a self-disciplined, self-motivated person who schedules things very well and is very organized, then this is the class for you. If, however, you're having some second thoughts about, organization and discipline and motivation, then you might want to reconsider why you can still get your money back. And the reason why is this is an accelerated 8-week course. That is, we will have as much reading, as many assignments, as many lectures as you would have for a regular 16-week course. So it's an accelerated 8-week course. We're moving literally twice as fast as we normally would. Because we are not meeting in a face-to-face format, that means that we need to leave the lines of communication open in other ways. Please know that I absolutely love teaching. I've won many teaching awards, both at Thomas More College, where I was for 23 years. I've been here at Northern since 2009. And I've won regional teaching awards as well. Now, I am here to help you. If you have any questions or concerns, always feel free to email me at my email address listed there. I check email messages every day, which is an understatement because I'm probably checking them 10, 12 times a day. Or feel free to call my cell phone. I have that on generally between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. Whether contacting me via email or cell phone, I will usually try to respond within 12 to 24 hours. Sometimes it's less than that. And please note that I do not use text messaging. It's not a part of my cell phone contract. Now, one thing that is important for you to look at is to download the syllabus from the class Blackboard site. And it's all very self-explanatory, and if you have any questions, you can get a hold of me either by email or cell phone. But basically, there's 820 points for the class, an icebreaker of 20 points due this first week, 5 critiques, which I'm going to show you how to do that in week 3. The first one will be due week 3. 2 tests. We're going to have these 2 objective tests worth 125 points each. One each in week 1, and then the second one in week 2, and a final reflective paper. Now that all adds up to 820, but if you see the table down below, you can see that I have 20 points. I call it my famous, I don't know how famous it is, self-service extra credit. So 100% in this class is actually 800 points. Anything above 800 is just all extra credit. So the extra credit is built in, so I don't offer any kinds of other extra credit during the course of the 8 weeks. Now, what you should know is that Blackboard can figure out a lot of things, but Gradebook in Blackboard cannot figure out my self-service extra credit. So if at any point in time you look at your Gradebook and you say, gee, Gradebook tells me that I'm earning an A-, and I figure I've got an A in your class, it just might be because Gradebook can't figure out that 20 extra points. If you ever have any concerns about your grades, if somehow I forgot to post a grade or whatever, or you're wondering about your grade, by all means, please get a hold of me. Well, let's start the history of India with a little quiz. And we're going to call this Name This Nation. This nation occupies one of the world's largest land areas, home to an array of different climates. It has one of the largest populations in the world. It was once a colony of Great Britain, but gained its independence. English is the official language. According to the latest available statistics, it has a growing gulf between its richest and poorest citizens. And 6, it is one of the world's largest democracies. The answer is the United States. You probably thought the answer was going to be India because this is a course on the history of India. The reason why I'm doing this kind of startling quiz where the answer is not an obvious one is because there are many similarities between the United States and India. So let's look at the U.S. and India side by side in the most current statistics. The United States has 317 million people. You know, literally only about 1/4 of the 1.2 billion people in India. The United States is over twice as large in square miles, that is in terms of area. They're both constitutional federal republics, so it is true that the United States is one of the world's largest democracies, but India is the world's largest democracy, which means, yes, it's really important for us to be studying about India. Once a colony of Great Britain, the United States gained its independence in 1783. India did in 1947. Look at the difference in gross domestic product per capita, that is per person, 50,700 in the U.S. versus 3,900. India is poor. The population below the poverty line, a little bit more than 15% in the U.S., twice that in India. Our official language, English. Theirs is Hindi, although English is a second language because they were once a colony of Great Britain. All of these statistics in that little quiz should get your mind thinking about something. And that is one of many themes that we're going to read about, talk about, you're going to try to figure out for yourself, because what we're very interested in doing, as you'll see in the syllabus, is working on our reading and analysis skills, our critical thinking skills. So how did India, which you're going to find out in the first 2 weeks here, how did India, historically one of the world's wealthiest civilizations, become one of the world's poorest nations? That's going to be one of our themes. As we look at the study of India, we have to realize that India is a part of Asia. And Asia itself is kind of this, geographic expression for what is just one giant supercontinent of Europe and Asia, sometimes called Eurasia. If you're going to distinguish between the two, Europe and Asia, then the official boundaries usually given are the Ural Mountains and the Ural River of Russia. And then down here in this area, the Dardanelles Straits, the Sea of Marmara, and the Bosphorus Strait. So in other words, everything on this side, which is Turkey and eastward, is considered Asia. So clearly, we know from this map, since everything, east of this up here is Asia, then we're right down here in India. And you can see that India is indeed part of, the Indian subcontinent, it's usually called. And you're going to see going right essentially through India. It's actually not shown. It's just a little bit north of this line of 20 degrees latitude. So it would be at 23.5 degrees latitude. We're talking about the Tropic of Cancer, which we're going to explain why that is very important. And it determines largely the kind of climate that India has. And so let's look at the climate. Let's just review some basic things from geography from, long time ago. If the Earth were not tilted on its axis, if it were just, like this, then of course the sun's rays would be hitting quite differently the world at different angles. They would definitely be hitting the equator more directly on, so that would be hotter, and in fact it is. But, up here in the North Pole, the same kinds of rays, the width of those rays would be spread out over this, so it would be colder. And down, as you go southward too, the same thing would be true. It would be colder as well. But if the Earth wasn't on an axis, and it is tilted on an axis, but if it were just straight up and down here, you would never really have any distinct seasons, right? The weather, the climate would always be the same wherever you were in the world. But we know that the world doesn't spin on its axis straight up and down and on a perpendicular line, perpendicular right angle, with its ecliptic path around the sun. Rather, the Earth is tilted. And it's tilted about 23.5 degrees from the perpendicular. And since this is a 90-degree right angle, 23.5 and 66.5 equals 90 degrees. So it's tilted from the perpendicular to the plane of the ecliptic about 23.5 degrees. Now keep that 23.5 degrees number in mind. Don't forget it. So the seasons, if we're looking at North America where we live, and you can see right here, well, then here we are on June 21st, which is the summer solstice and the beginning of summer. And we see that the Earth is more tilted towards the sun. That's why we have summer, right? And then we go over here and we get the autumnal equinox. We're in autumn. And we go here, the winter solstice. We're in winter. See how we're tilted away? So it's going to be colder. And then over here, March 21st in spring. Now the Tropic of Cancer is located at 23.5 degrees north latitude. And there is another tropic line called the Tropic of Capricorn, which is located at 23.5 degrees south latitude. So the Tropic of Cancer would be in the northern hemisphere. The northern hemisphere is everything from the equator up. The southern hemisphere would have the Tropic of Capricorn. Now, in between those two, generally we find in the world tropical climates. So, again, this shows a little bit about what happens and why the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn appear as they do at 23.5 degrees, because what did we say that the Earth was tilted at? 23.5 degrees. And that means that right here, it's 23.5 degrees where the rays are going to appear at certain times of the year during the solstices, right? So India is crossed by the Tropic of Cancer. So we went through all that explanation for a really good reason. It's crossed by the Tropic of Cancer. It's located in the northern hemisphere, so just like we are here in the United States, its seasons basically occur at the same time as our own in North America, except that India is much hotter year-round. Now, why is it hotter year-round? Because it's crossed by the Tropic of Cancer, so a lot of its climates are going to be tropical. But it's also hotter because of the Himalaya mountains in the north, which shield India from cold Arctic air. And I needed to put the other C there in Arctic. My apologies. So you can see all of the tropical climates here in green, including some tropical rainforests, and you can see deserts, etc. And you can see that we're going to be dealing with some very warm conditions in India. And before we look at a big factor in the understanding of India's climate, its weather, its culture, everything about it, even the things that it grows like rice and other stuff, and what the people eat, we really need to understand two very easy weather commandments. The first one says that land areas heat up and cool down more rapidly than water. And that means, conversely, on the other hand, water heats up and cools down more slowly than land. Thus, water has a tempering effect on climate. And we know this because, hey, it takes a long time of very cold conditions for a pond or a lake, or especially a river, to freeze over. That's due to some other factors as well, but just keep that in mind. And where do you go in the summer when you get hot? You say, hey, I'm going to go someplace to the water, right? I'm going to go to the beach by the ocean or by a lake. I'm going to go boating. I'm going to go to the swimming pool. And we know, boy, when the swimming pool's open, in this area in May or June, sometimes they're still much colder than the surrounding air. Well, hot air, whether it's over water or land, rises, and when it rises, it experiences a drop in atmospheric pressure. Cold air falls and experiences a rise in atmospheric pressure. So, you know, whenever you watch the news and you see the weatherman or weatherwoman, right, come out, and they have the H's for high pressure and the L's for low pressure. Well, we know this to be the fact because whoever talks about cold air balloons, they're not cold air balloons, right? They're hot air balloons. Hot air rises. That's why they put them in balloons. Now, this is all very important to an understanding of monsoons because monsoons are just critical to an understanding of India. Now, a monsoon might bring up in your mind a torrential rains, right? Like you see sometimes in the movie, constantly raining. That is not what a monsoon is. In fact, a monsoon is a climate that has distinct wet and dry seasons. Guess what? We don't live in a monsoon climate in the United States because in the United States, especially right around here in Cincinnati and northern Kentucky, we have precipitation year-round. Sometimes we have more snow, sometimes we have more rain, say in spring than we do in summer, but we do not have any distinct wet and dry seasons. We may have some that are wetter and some that are a little drier, but not distinct wet and dry seasons. So what in the world happens? Well, we have to keep in mind how large the Eurasian continent is. From May to November, India experiences the summer monsoon, and that's depicted right down here. As the air over the Indian subcontinent heats up more rapidly than the surrounding ocean, a low pressure zone, here in L, forms over the land. Meanwhile, the air over the ocean heats up more slowly, forming a high pressure zone, as you see here indicated by the H. Winds always go from high pressure zones, in this case the ocean, towards the low pressure zone, in this case the land, where they dump lots of rain. On the western coast of India, along the Arabian Sea, down way here in South India, along the so-called Malabar coast, some areas may experience over 15 inches of rain during July alone. Summer is hot and rainy in India. You don't want to travel to India during that time period. Really anything from April, May onwards. It's just miserable. It's too hot. It's too rainy. It's not healthy for people who are not accustomed to do that. Even the Buddha himself would take time off during the summer monsoon and settle down and not travel around India. Even the Indians themselves don't do a lot of traveling. Now, that is a wet season. That's the summer monsoon. From November to May, the rest of the year, India experiences the dry monsoon. The air over the Indian subcontinent cools down much more rapidly than the surrounding ocean, forming, as we see here, a high-pressure system over the land, and a low-pressure system forms over the ocean. And winds always go from high pressure to low pressure, so dry winds come in from the north to the south, and India is very dry and warm in the winter. And if you're going to visit, then, you know, October, November, December, January, February, those are really the best times to visit. And you might say, oh, but it's going to be cold. No, it's not going to be that cold in India. But, you know, when you might also have to consider the fact that you want to go to a nice hotel, a nice Western type hotel that has plenty of heating available. Some of the Indian homes can get cold in the evening because some of them do not have heating systems such as we do. So let's talk a little bit more about the geography of India. India is the second most populous country in the world with 1.2 billion. By the year 2028, it will be the world's largest, most populous country. It will overtake China's population by then. Well, the one thing that we talked about already were the monsoons. And rice production, the growing of rice. You have to grow rice from its little seedlings in rice paddies, which literally are filled with water, right? They're fields that are flooded with water. So the monsoons are absolutely essential to the growing of rice. And of course, rice is a very good nutrient source. And so you can grow in some parts of India several crops of rice a year. So it made sense that India's population was very well fed for many, many centuries, and that the population could grow accordingly because there was plenty of food. The climate certainly made that possible. Now, to the northwest in India are the Hindu Kush Mountains up here in the area of, Pakistan, Afghanistan up here. To the northeast are the world's tallest mountains, the Himalayas. And up here in the Hindu Kush Mountains, between Afghanistan and Pakistan, is a very well-known mountain pass called the Khyber Pass. This was the way that a lot of the early invaders, travelers, visitors, traders, people trading with India, they would need to come through the Khyber Pass. And in fact, the Silk Road, which we'll be talking about, passed through the Khyber Pass as well. India in the north, it has two major rivers. Well, it has a number of major rivers, but the two we're going to talk about are the Indus and the Ganges River. The in between here is a large plain, especially over in this area east of the Great Indian Desert or the Thar Desert. This Indo-Gangetic plain is some of the most fertile areas for production of agriculture and crops, and a lot of people live in this area as well. The Indus River, of course, empties into the Arabian Sea here, and the Ganges River over here empties into the Bay of Bengal. Up here, these five rivers forming the Indus River form the area of the so-called Punjab, and you see I have the arrow pointing up to the Punjab. Punjab or Punjab literally meaning the five rivers. Now, the climate changes a little bit right around another group of mountains called the Vindhya Range, right here about halfway down India, and the Narmada River. And things become more jungle-like, and certainly in the Deccan Plateau they can be at times very dry. This is very important when you look at the maps that we provide you, and you see that a lot of these Indian empires and even a lot of the invaders concentrated mainly on North India. There was a reason for that. That is, it's sometimes very difficult to cross the Vindhya Range and the Narmada River to enter into the more inhospitable environment of the Deccan Plateau. And if one did invade, it was very much harder to hold this area. Now, there are plenty of people that live in South India, and many times they had their own kingdoms and their own empires, and we'll talk about some of those. Over here on the west side on the Arabian Sea are the Western Ghats mountain chain, the Eastern Ghats on the eastern side, and sometimes the western side of this obviously gets a lot of rain, but like a lot of mountains, usually on the windward side where the wind is coming, the western side in this case, that'll receive a lot of rain, but you get less rain, you get kind of a rain shadow over here, so conditions will become a little more dry up in some of these areas. Now, having said all that, the other important component that we need to understand, and that your books spend actually less time talking about, and that the series by the BBC called The Story of India, which we'll be watching, talks less about, is this kind of whole Eastern philosophic heritage. And understanding the religions and philosophies that became commonplace in India is very important to an understanding, obviously, of the culture, of the society, of the politics, even of what is happening today. So first of all, I want to talk about 4 general notes about all world religions and philosophies. These are just general things we can say. The first one is, number 1, major world religions and philosophies, such as Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism, etc. They've appealed to a wide audience because they address some of the basic questions of humankind. These are meaning of life questions. What's it all about? Is there more to life than this? What is good? What is evil? Why do bad things sometimes happen to good people? Why do good things sometimes happen to bad people? Is there some kind of afterlife, etc.? So they have been appealing because religions and philosophies have studied and have talked about the basic meaning of life. Number 2, major world religions and philosophies have been flexible enough to change over the course of time, to meet new needs and new circumstances. And this explains their persistence and longevity. It's really going to explain, one of the world's oldest religions, Hinduism, and another very old religion, Buddhism, as well as Christianity and Judaism and Islam. Number 3, there was a time period, and you're going to hear Michael Wood discuss this in his Story of India, and you're going to hear me and others, about the 500s BCE, before Christ was BC, nowadays they call it BCE, before the Common Era. There was a so-called Axis Age, AXIS. This is where, this is the time period that all throughout the world people were questioning of life and what life was all about. So this is the time period that Buddha lived, that many of the ancient, classical Greek philosophers lived, that the Jewish prophet Isaiah lived, that Mahavira, the founder of Jainism, lived, Confucius in China with Confucianism, Lao Tzu with Taoism, etc. Very interesting age, very important age. So sometimes, the third thing is the Axis Age, but sometimes in world history, there's just periods of time where human beings just need to sit down and discuss the larger questions of life. And number 4, there's almost always a difference between the more official philosophy or dogma of a religion or a philosophy and its popularization. So common people throughout history, ordinary people, peasants, who are not as well educated, maybe not even literate, tend to look at sometimes religion and philosophies much different than the intelligentsia, the people, who are educated and literate and all of that. And very oftentimes the common people incorporate local elements into their religion and into their philosophic framework. So that popular religion sometimes contains features that would hardly be recognizable by their original founders. Now, as we look at Eastern philosophies and religions, it's important to state that there are some differences between kind of Western religions and Eastern philosophies and religions. The first one is that Western thought is more dualistic. This goes back to the Greeks. And by dualism, we mean seeing the heavens and the earth as vastly different. Eastern religions, as you're going to see here in a minute, see the world more as unified. The earth and the heavens are one. So there's a less of an emphasis in Eastern religions and philosophies, and by Eastern I mean Asian, a less of an emphasis on the individual and on an individual soul, and more on the harmony with nature. The second thing I want to point out is Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism don't have a supreme kind of figure, ruler, in religious matters. They don't have the equivalent of a Roman Catholic Pope, or like an Orthodox, leader as well, or, a Jewish leader. Sometimes they don't even have a priesthood itself. So, those are important differences. Now, the first thing we want to look at is Hinduism. And Hinduism, some people will say, is polytheistic. And by polytheistic, we mean many gods and goddesses. Some people say there are millions of gods and goddesses in Hinduism. Now, it's important to make a distinction that might be believed by some Hindus, but by some very educated Hindus, and many of the Hindus I know, I would not describe them as polytheistic, but as monotheistic. And monotheistic means one God. They believe, like Christians, in one God, but they see these gods and goddesses in much the sense that some Christians would see saints. Maybe they see them as just slightly different. That's really maybe not a good description, excuse me. They see them more as representations, incarnations, avatars, whatever, of the one God. But most of my Hindu friends will say, they believe in one God, and that all these gods and goddesses are just representations of particular personality traits, whatever, virtues of that one God. The Hinduism really has its roots in the age of the Aryans and their migration into India, and that goes way, way, way back to, some say 1700 BC, some say 1500 BC. Again, we're going to be using BC and BCE, those two things interchangeably. They mean the same thing. And early on in world history and in Indian history, please do not worry about whether one author says it's 1700 BC and another author says it's 1500 BC and another one says it's 1300 BC, because we're dealing with archaeology, we're dealing with prehistory, and we historians and archaeologists could be all disagreeing, and there could be a 400 or 500 year disagreement there. It really doesn't matter at this point in time. We'll worry about dates more when we get to the later stuff. Now, the Vedas were scriptures of the Aryan, and whether they were invaders, whether they came originally to invade or whether they migrated to India, we still don't know. But the Vedas were scriptures of these Aryan invaders. And the Rig Veda is a collection of over 1,000 hymns to the Hindu deities. And the interesting thing about the Rig Veda is it is the oldest work of literature in an Indo-European language. The oldest living religious literature of the world. And it contains all kinds of references to the Hindu gods Shiva and Vishnu, etc. Later on, the Upanishads were scriptures, collective works, that carried these early speculations further and contained the Upanishads contained the first formulation of the doctrine of samsara, karma, and nirvana. So we need to quickly discuss what samsara, karma, and nirvana are. Samsara is what we sometimes refer to as reincarnation or transmigration of souls. Historical Hinduism placed considerable emphasis on a continuing cycle of rebirth. There was literally a continuum of life stretching from the smallest living things to the largest. And when you died, you didn't go to heaven or hell. You were returned, that is, you were reborn up or down the continuum. If you had been evil in your life, you might be reborn as a lower animal. If you were better, then obviously you could be reborn as a more educated person, or maybe you even will obtain nirvana. Even the gods were seen as dying and being reborn again. So this is the idea of samsara. Karma is the principle by which one life is connected to the next. It's the thing that says every action produces consequences, even if those consequences aren't realized until subsequent lives in the whole reincarnation cycle. So the law of karma would say that if somehow, I'm your friend now, maybe in a prior life, some one of us had either helped one another, or maybe in fact, we had harmed one another. Maybe we were enemies, and now in this life we were reliving things to make things right, to correct the bad karma in our life from prior lives. Nirvana. The idea of nirvana is escaping from this cycle of rebirth, literally liberating oneself. It's the point at which you wouldn't be born anymore. Now, nirvana wasn't heaven. It was a union with the ultimate reality. And the way it's sometimes explained is it's what is left, and this is the analogy, what is left after the candle is blown out. You blow out a candle, you see a puff of smoke, and then that puff of smoke, that thing that was the candle, the flame, becomes a puff of smoke which becomes one with the air around it. Hence, obtaining nirvana. Hindus believe that the universe had no beginning and will have no end, that time is cyclic, and that there are other galaxies comparable to our own. Hinduism held that underlying man's personality and animating it is a reservoir of being that never dies, is never exhausted, and is without limit in awareness and bliss. This infinite center of every life, this hidden self, is the Atman. And the Atman is no less than Brahman, the Godhead. Body, personality, Atman, Brahman, man is not completely accounted for until all three have been named. So if we are limitless and we are able to have eternal bliss and awareness, if we're infinite in our being, why isn't this apparent? And the Hindus say it's not because this infinite nature, this bliss, is buried upon an almost impenetrable mass of distractions, false ideas, impulses that comprise our surface being. It's like a lamp or a light that is so covered with dirt and dust that its light is not visible. Man is a layered being. We have to strip away the layers to find the infinite, but the infinite lies within us. Happiness is attainable in this life, and that is a very important other distinction between Eastern philosophies and Western religions and philosophies. Eastern philosophies will say happiness is attainable in this life. Western religions tend to say happiness is only attainable in an afterlife. Hindus realize that nothing in this life seems final, permanent, fulfilling. Everything seems illusory. Everything seems temporary. And Hindus recognize that people go through different paths, different stages in their lives as they grow older and mature. For instance, according to the Hindus, sometimes when people are young, they search for pleasure. This is the path of desire. And what they find out is that that pleasure is always just temporary. It's never completely satisfying. We always want more. And furthermore, that pleasure is selfish. And it's too much about us and what we can get, and not about other people. And in that way, it saps you, it drains you of energy. And we learn that you can't follow every impulse, that sometimes you have to sacrifice small goals for greater future ones. And you can't go and pleasure your impulses to injure others. So then sometimes they say, well, then we go and look for worldly success. And we find that you can't really find happiness there either. So as younger people, we determine that the path of desire is not one that leads to satisfaction. So as we get older, we pursue a path of renunciation. And it's like that of an athlete. No pain, no gain. We know that we can't be selfish. We know that we have to serve others. And by serving others, and by realizing that we're one of a larger group of people, and by realizing that this infinite joy is possible, this infinite awareness, this infinite being, this is where then the Hindus say that you're on the path to this understanding of our infinite self and infinity itself. And to help you along that path, the Hindus would engage in yoga. Yoga is a method of training designed to lead to that integration or union of, that there are multiple paths to God depending upon your personality. So for some, yoga is more like meditation. It's more reflective. It's more intellectual. Some people who are more emotional, theirs might involve becoming one with the infinite through love. Some who are more physical can become, one with the infinite through karma yoga, and that's the yoga that we tend to think of, in the United States. And we also tend to think of, the lotus position and all of that with yoga as well. Now, one more thing we need to say about Hinduism. It had a caste system. Originally, it consisted of the first 4 groups only, and then the 5th one was added. And also, the castes were not originally hereditary. The first caste consisted of the intellectual and the spiritual leaders, or the Brahmins. Then the organizers, producers, which would have been craftsmen, artisans, and farmers. The unskilled laborers, and then the people who did the absolute dirtiest things. Picking up night soil, that is, picking up people's excrement, before the days of sanitary sewers. People who were engaged in butchering animals, people who were engaged in burying people. Those were the outcasts or untouchables. Of course, this has all been, made illegal in modern India, but it's important to understand that there was this very hierarchical system. Now, we looked at Hinduism. Now we need to look at Jainism. The Jains believe that the universe has no beginning and no end, just like the Hindus, but that the universe passes through an infinite number of cycles. And sometimes things are going forward, they're going upward, and sometimes the universe is going downward. It's kind of descending. It's not in a good place. During each of these ascent and descent, 24 great teachers are Jina, it's the Sanskrit term for victorious, or they're sometimes called Tirthankaras, ford makers to cross the river of transmigration. These 24 great teachers during each ascent and descent appear. The last great teacher of our age of decline was Mahavira, who lived from 599 to about 527 BC, and he was the founder of Jainism and a contemporary of Buddha, the founder of Buddhism. He became a mendicant after the death of his parents, practiced silence, that is, meditation, fasting, etc., for 12 years, and in the 13th year of doing this, he experienced omniscience, a state of all-knowing. He stated that reality could be seen from different viewpoints, what is sometimes called the doctrine of non-absolutism, so that, you couldn't see reality just from one viewpoint, but from more than one viewpoint. Something like the soul, he said, as an example of non-absolutism, could be both finite and infinite. It could be corporal, that is body, and it could be incorporeal, it could be spiritual. And that human language was incapable of expressing this non-absolutism, so that the best we can do to describe reality is by using the terminology maybe. They also believed, Jains, in the law of karma, operative in the transmigration of souls, and that through right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct, the soul would be liberated. And especially important, they believed in the doctrine of nonviolence, applying to both animals and insects. So, Jains will not kill insects, and they were vegetarian because they do not kill animals, and they do not drink alcohol. Then Buddhism. Buddhism was a reform of Hinduism. Hinduism had become quite bleak or fatalistic in its outlook for many people. They were worried that they would have to undergo hundreds, if not thousands, of reincarnation. And that was not very appealing to some people. Buddhism was founded also in the Axis Age by Siddhartha Gautama, otherwise known as the Buddha. His father was a rich feudal lord, and the legend is told of 4 passing sights that when he was born, the legend was that he would be either a very famous, wealthy king, or that he would be a very famous teacher. And his parents said, not this teaching stuff, it just doesn't pay. We're going to make certain that he becomes this wealthy, famous king. So they tried to shield him from all of those things that might prevent him from doing what he needed to do if he became a king. And they didn't want him to build up his compassion, because if he became too compassionate, he would become a teacher. And so they shielded old people from him, disease from him. They didn't even let him know about death. And when he would go out in a carriage for a ride, people went in front of him, the servants went in front of him, and they cleared the way of all undesirable elements. Well, one day he went out in his carriage, and despite the attempt of the servants to clear the way, miraculously an old man appeared. And he said, "Who is this?" And they said, "That's an old man." And he said, "Well, I become old." And they had to say, "Yes, you will." Then he came across a diseased man. And he said, "Who's this?" And they told him all about disease. "Could I ever get disease and illness?" "Yes, you could." Then the third sight was a corpse. And this introduces him to death. And then the fourth one was a monk. And at age 29, he left his wife and son and went off into the forest for 6 years to find himself, becoming an ascetic, living an austere life of self-denial, not eating a lot, fasting, not drinking a lot, etc. And then he said, this life of self-denial, I'm not getting anything. So one day he sat beneath a Bodhi tree. He gained enlightenment, became enraptured for 49 days, and he came up with the doctrine of the middle ways. On the one hand, the middle way, he said, you can't indulge yourself in all of your pleasures, but on the other hand, you can't deny yourself everything as well. He came up with the Four Noble Truths. The first one, he said, was that all life is full of sorrow and suffering. No matter who you are, all life is inevitably at one time full of sorrow and suffering. But he said, number two, that sorrow and suffering is caused by our desires. 3, he said the sorrow and suffering can only be stopped by controlling our desires. So all of these things build upon one another. And that you could control, number 4, you could gain that control by practicing the Eightfold Path, which was a course of disciplined moral conduct, a lot of which was focused on meditation. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, recognized that the world is in a constant state of flux and change, and a lot of our happiness is directly related to our craving for permanence, that we had to accept the transience of life. Now, one thing he said that was very appealing to many people is he said that you could achieve nirvana from any level in the caste system. You did not have to be a Brahmin, the top level in the caste system, to attain nirvana. Now, from Buddhism, 2 types of Buddhism emerge. The first one, called Theravada Buddhism, was the belief that to achieve nirvana, you had to leave the world behind and enter a monastery. The second type was Mahayana Buddhism, the belief that you could live in this world and still achieve nirvana if you live a good moral life. And this one introduced the concept of the Bodhisattva, a deceased human being who could attain nirvana if he chose to do so. He or she chose to do so. But out of compassion has volunteered to stay behind and help others attain nirvana. The Bodhisattvas were literally the Buddhist saints, like Christian saints. Buddhism was ultimately introduced into China, where it existed side by side with Confucianism. Ironically, Buddhism largely died out in later years in India, the place of its very origins. Now, another very important religion still today in India and in neighboring Pakistan and Bangladesh is that of Islam, founded by the great prophet Muhammad, who stated that there is no God but Allah, that is the God, and Muhammad is his prophet. So this was a monotheistic religion, a belief in one God. And its sacred book was the Quran. Now, the religion itself is called Islam. The followers of it are called Muslims or Muslims. So be certain in your writing when you talk about it that you get the distinction correct. The one is the religion and the other is the followers. In AD 632, Muhammad died, at which time he controlled nearly all of Arabia, and by the time a century had passed after his death, his followers had conquered a far-flung area. Islamic beliefs, or the 5 pillars of Islam, are listed here, and just for your own review, if you've never learned anything about Islam, you can read about these 5 pillars of Islam. Now, the thing is with Islam is that Muhammad did not have any living sons. And so, with no surviving sons, in AD 656, his son-in-law and cousin, Ali, this was Muhammad's cousin, but it also was his son-in-law. Upon the death of the reigning caliph or political leader, he claimed the caliphate, the ruler position. And he fought a war, civil war, lost and was killed. And at that time, a dynasty unrelated to Muhammad, the Umayyad dynasty, began to rule. Now, what is happening here is very important for you to understand that in, centuries ago, there was no clear distinction between church and state, between religion, the religious end of things, and the secular. They were both tied together. So what essentially is a difference appears between the followers of Muhammad and his family of Ali, who became known as Shi'at Ali or Shiites, and the followers of this unrelated dynasty, the Umayyad dynasty, who felt that the leadership belonged just to the best Muslim, whomever that might be, and they were called the Sunnis. So if you want to know more about this, yes, there are more issues that, will philosophically divide them, but essentially, that's the beginning of it. You also, if you wanted to review the world history, this really doesn't deal with India. You can know who the different Islamic dynasties were, the Abbasid dynasty, and, they were finally defeated by the Mongols, and you're going to hear about them again in India, and Tamerlane as well. And then finally, with Islam, we need to realize that a kind of more mystical, philosophical branch of that is called Sufism. And you can read about that here, because the Sufis are very important and have been very important and have played a major role in India. Finally, we have to do one more religion. We're not doing Judaism and Christianity because we assume that you know a lot more about those being in a Western culture, and also because Christianity and Judaism, while present in India, are much smaller than, Hinduism and Islam, Sikhism, etc. Guru Nanak lived 1469-1539, was the founder of Sikhism. The followers of Sikhism are called Sikhs. It is the fifth largest organized religion in the world. About 75% of the Sikhs live in that area of the Five Rivers, the Punjab area. It is monotheistic. It's a belief in one universal, infinite, and omnipresent God. God created the universe. Sikhs believe in the equality of all humans, regardless of religion, race, or gender. There are no priests. Humans should avoid the illusions of life, Maya life, which include the five thieves: lust, anger, greed, attachment, and pride. Sikhs strive to practice the five virtues: truth, compassion, contentment, humility, love. Humans should spend their life searching for truth and being truthful in order to be reunited, mukti, with the ultimate truth, God, after death. Now, as we look at a number of things, we're going to be looking at some major empires. We're going to be looking in this class at the Mughal Empire and at the founder of that, Babur, at Akbar. We're going to be looking at Shah Jahan and his building of the Taj Mahal, pictured here. We're going to be looking at the Portuguese, French, and British that all started setting up trading ports in India, and how the Treaty of Paris, at the end of that, Britain would receive most of India, how India was for Britain, and that shows the British conquest of India, how India was run by a private company, the British East India Company, and how in 1857-58, the Great Uprising or Sepoy Mutiny would lead to the great decision, and by great I don't mean it was a good decision, just it's a giant critical decision in 1858, which Britain made to end the British East India Company's rule of India and to make India officially a part of the British Empire. We're going to be looking at Mahatma Gandhi, Muhammad Jinnah. We're going to be looking at the 1947 independence to India, which becomes a largely Hindu state, and how it was divided into two places in 1947, India Hindu and Pakistan Muslim. And that is represented here. There was a Pakistan in East Pakistan. This is now called Bangladesh. And so we're going to be looking a lot at Gandhi, who, by the way, was assassinated in 1948 by a Hindu. His legacy was great. Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States. In reference to his own campaign of nonviolence resistance to civil rights abuses, later stated that Christ gave me the message, Gandhi gave me the method. A saying of Gandhi perhaps best sums up his life. In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists. In the midst of darkness, light persists. Hence I gather that God is life, truth, light. He is love. He is the supreme good. All of this is very much kind of tying up the package that we told you of Eastern religions and their philosophies. First they ignore you, Gandhi said. Then they laugh at you. Then they fight you. Then you win. We're going to start out for the first 2 weeks by viewing the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation's documentary, The Story of India. It is told by a wonderful historian, linguist, and documentarian called Michael Wood. You'll recognize him from other such documentaries. I give you 2 note-taking guides, parts 1 and 2 and parts 3 and 5. They're provided on the class Blackboard site. And there'll be 2 objective tests where you may use your notes, PowerPoints, books, etc., but not each other. All of this is contained, of course, on the Blackboard site. You need to go to see this BBC documentary. I went to pbs.org, which is the public broadcasting service for the United States. I just, typed in Story of India. It took me to it. When I hit it, it then brought me to a link at Amazon.com, and it said it was going to charge me $1.99 per episode. We're going to see 6 episodes, so, that's less than $12. However, I have never paid to see any of the episodes, so I don't know if PBS has some sort of deal with Amazon, and Amazon is just hosting the website for this. So the best scenario for you could be you go to the pbs.org site and you end up doing what I did, and it takes you to Amazon and you get it all for free. The worst scenario is you go somehow to Amazon and you have to pay $1.99 per episode. But Michael Wood can do what I cannot do, that is take you to India. And very recently, this was done in this century, the 21st century. It's only a few years old, and it has the best cinematography. And when you're watching that, print this one little guide to the major civilizations and things happening. And I got a little mnemonic, a memory device, in case any of you want to go to graduate school and you want to somehow remember how these things all come in proper chronological order. You could have, the proper chronological order thing on test 1. In fact, you will, but you'll be able to use all your notes. But for those who want to go to graduate school or take the GRE or whatever, this would be a helpful little guide. And while you're watching the Story of India, it will be a helpful little guide for you to see where all the parts fit. Any questions, please feel free to email or phone me. I'm always happy to help.